You're listening to Kayak Flyer with your host, Sean. This week we're brought to you by Tennessee Trailers, OutdoorAdventureTrailers.com, the best way to get your kayak to and from the water. Cutthroat Furled Leaders, the only leaders that I use. Cutthroat Furled Leaders are guaranteed to perform for whatever species of fish you're chasing. Check them out at cutthroatfurledleaders.com. Save 15% promo kayak. Stoneflynets.com, the very best in handcrafted and custom fishing nets made in the great state of Arkansas. Check out Stonefly Nets at stoneflynets.com. It really helps when I turn the lights on down here in the studio if we're getting ready to have a podcast. Otherwise, it'll just be dark. And I'm hoping that did it. There we go. Hey, gang, if you're listening to the podcast, I know it's been a couple of weeks, but that's for good reason. I went down to the Sow Bug Roundup. You guys heard Patty and I talking about it. Man, what a great time that was. It was absolutely amazing. Had such a great time. I got to go to a private party with Patty and some of her friends, and I met Ron there, and Ron's our guest tonight. And I want to tell you a little bit about Ron, because this is a guy that you don't see a lot often. Ron's been fly fishing and fly tying since the time he was 13 years old. He's fished everywhere from British Columbia all the way down to Belize and almost everywhere in between. Right now, just so you know, this guy is legit. He is currently the director of fly tying for FFI Texas Council. Was one of the authors of the FFI Saltwater Fly Tying Manual, right? He's also been a longtime member of the FFI Texas Fly Fishers Club in Houston, and regularly gives fly tying and casting sessions with this club. He also has given tying and casting lessons for Reels for Recovery, Good Fly, Project Healing Waters, and FFI Women Connect. Now, this is where it really gets interesting, guys, because, you know, we all have casting guys and we all have fly guys. Well, Ron is one of the very few people that is both a fly designer for Umpqua and an FFI casting instructor. Now, he lives in the great state of Texas, where all the great folks who don't live in Missouri live, so we know that. And you're an engineer by trade. How do you make time for all of that?
Well, that's why you probably haven't heard much about me. Because, I work for one of the big high-tech companies, so I have a pretty crazy schedule. So I get the fly fishing, fly tying, and instruction in when I can.
Yeah, and, you know, that's a really nice combination to be able to do the fly tying and the fly design, but then also the casting aspect of it. Because a lot of guys tie flies and they fly fish, and a lot of guys do a lot of the casting and are teaching a lot of those classes. But to marry those two things together, it's a little unusual sometimes.
Okay, I'm unusual. Thanks. But to me, I'm going to use tied together, because as I design flies, I'm designing flies for castability.
Right.
So I design flies so that they don't have a lot of drag. They might even have a little bit of positive lift, which allows me to cast further and more accurately with those flies. So it really is, I think, all tied together, should be looked at holistically, both casting and fly tying.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that I've noticed. I've made a couple of really nice flies, and then I go to cast them, and I'm like, dude, this isn't going to work on a 4-weight.
I got a rude awakening once. I was on a project up in Michigan, and there's a bunch of spring creeks up there besides, the Ausable and Manistee and several other big rivers. And I read an article in Fly Tire magazine about these quill wing mayflies. You take 2 quill wings, and I spent hours and hours tying a dozen of those quill wings just to make sure they were perfectly aligned. All right. You know what happens? 3 casts, and my straight leader was a furled leader.
Yeah.
And it sounded like a helicopter going over my head. Brrr, brrr, when I cast. So that taught me early on that, you need to design your flies so that they are very castable.
Yeah, and that's one of the things, and it was brought up more than once down at the Sow Bug that a good fly catches fish. A better fly catches fishermen. The best fly catches both. But when it comes down to it,
reverse that order. Because I see a lot of fly designs, and they're pieces of art. They're just beautiful, but you look at them from like how we look at them, they're beautiful, but you really got to look at them from how a fish looks at them. And then that's what's important. And that's what makes them catch fish.
Yeah, and
The
that's
fish's
that's
perspective.
that's one thing that always cracks me up. I see guys make, frogs and different, stuff, mice, and they have ears on it and they have little eyes on top of it and they've got the whiskers and it's like the fish isn't going to see all that, you know. And so I think sometimes we get carried away. So when you're tying and designing these flies, how much of it is going into the I know you're doing castability, but what in the market plays for catching the fisherman?
So I'm a fly designer for Umpqua, and I can't say flies designer because they are only carrying one of my flies. And, and yeah, that is a concern because I've given Umpqua several of my flies. And because I'm primarily saltwater, I tie mainly for saltwater, some for warm water, and very little for cold water. They say, yeah, it's a really good looking fly, but there's not a demand for it.
Yeah.
So it's really when Umpqua and the other fly tying companies, there has to be a market. So they do their market research. They're looking for certain kind of flies. A majority of the flies are sold, of course, to trout and salmon fishermen, cold water. Some are sold to saltwater and probably more to warm water. So, but I fish saltwater, so that's mainly what I
Yeah.
tie for.
Yeah, and salt water, I mean, I've fished salt here and there and not as much as I want to, but that's a whole nother animal than trout, especially. Bass, I think, you're fishing for specks or something like that, something inshore, your general bass bugs you can generally get away with. But what are you looking for when you're out in the salt?
Okay, well the cliche is match the hatch, of course.
Hmm.
So when we are down on the coast, we're also matching the hatch. Of course, it's not a hatch, it's what's in the ecosystem. And I want to stop and say something real quick because this is one of my big philosophies in fly tying. So, everybody's heard the Lee Wolf quote when you teach someone to fly fish, you just created a conservationist.
Hmm.
Well, I believe if we do it correctly, whenever we teach somebody to tie flies, we've just created a naturalist.
Yeah.
So, to really get serious into fly tying, you need to know your ecosystem. You need to know what the predator fish are, what they're feeding on what time of the year, under what kind of conditions. And if you can do that, you'll become a better fly designer, you'll be a better fly fisherman, and more importantly, you'll catch more fish. So down on the coast, I primarily fish on the Texas coast. Our predator fish are primarily redfish, red drum, speckled sea trout, specks, and flounder. That's the Texas Grand Slam, if you will.
Yeah.
And so we're looking at bait fish patterns and crab patterns and shrimp patterns. And during different times of the year, there's different things you're going to be eating. So if you know the life cycle of a striped mullet or a white mullet, you know what size fly to tie at what time of the year. You have primarily brown shrimp and white shrimp. Well, they migrate in and out of the bays at different times. And then crabs, same thing. Very early on the year season, they may be tying really small crabs. By the time you get to fall, they're going to be about twice, three times as big. So it's really becoming that naturalist and learning what's there and being able to mimic it.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that I've found difficulty with, going somewhere new. You never know without putting in a lot of research on what flies working there, because I can ask, what fly should I take here? And some guy who was there in May said, oh, I was killing them on this, but I'm going in October and that's not going to be the same.
Correct. And you said the key word research. It
Mhm.
does take a lot of research, and a lot of studying, talking to other people, talking to people in the fly shops until you get a better idea of what's going on in that particular place in that particular time.
Yeah, and that's why having those local guys and local fly shops is just so important. I know a lot of guys today, and I'm guilty of it. We don't have a fly shop here in my town, so I order a lot of my stuff with Dooley's Fly Fishing, and he's a lot further north, and we don't have the same temperatures and things like that. So finding things that I need for around here, luckily I know because I've done the research, but that's not going to work for him. And that's definitely not going to work for somebody, across the country.
Mhm. But that's what makes fly fishing so much fun. You're constantly learning. I've been fly fishing, fly tying for 50 years, and I'm learning new things every day. Yeah, like I just you ran into Dutch Bauman at the
Hmm.
Salbug. So Dutch has been mentoring me in classic salmon flies. I was just tying up a silver doctor when you called. And that's a whole nother level of challenge. And
Yeah.
so now you start getting some esoteric discussions about, is this art
Yeah.
or is it fly tying? Are you designing new things? Are you copying classic patterns? Do you follow those patterns exactly? So there's this range of fly tires designers. Like we've got one guy in our club. If it takes more than 3 minutes to tie, that's too long. But he catches a lot of fish because he knows where he's fishing,
Yeah.
and he ties simple patterns that are very, very practical. The other extreme is, of course, the salmon fly tires, and the folks who do imitation flies, who
Hmm.
look very realistic flies, and those like a salmon fly, a complicated salmon fly, that's about a 6 hour tie over a couple of days.
Oh
But
yeah.
you're tying a piece of art, and it's really the history and all the background of that fly that's important. Now, the silver doctor that I'm tying, classic salmon fly, I will never fish that. It will go, it will go on the wall. Actually, I'm tying it for a friend. Hopefully, it'll go on his wall.
Yeah.
But that's
And
what the art is for.
yeah, and that's the funny thing is, I'll sit and I'll spend some time, contrary to popular belief, instead of just busting out guide flies, but I'll sit and try and tie some, and I look at them like, man, do I really want to, get that stuck on a branch underneath the water whenever I'm searching for smallmouth bass? You know, it's just too
Yeah.
pretty to lose. And that's a common thing. But what I was so impressed by with being at the Sow Bug and watching you and many others was it allowed me to see flies that were similar to what I needed, but then I could incorporate a style from somebody else or a material that somebody else was using. And I found that to be, if you've never been to a show like this or sat around and talked with a bunch of guys that are tying in a large group, I think that's information people really need to get.
Yeah, and that's why we have these fly tying festivals. So we have one in the Houston area, the Texas Fly Fishers. And this year we had the 29th annual fly tying festival. And it's named after one of the guys who mentored me when I came into the club almost 30 years ago, Dr. Ed Rislow. And he was from New York. So he was trained on the Northeast fly tying. So long history of fly patterns from that part of the country. And he would sit and tie a fly, a little mayfly, and it would be perfect. I mean, every little hair was in place. It was perfect. So he took me under his wing, and I learned a lot. But that's one of the big benefits of the fly clubs is there is so much to learn. The learning curve is pretty steep in some areas. I mean, you can tie a simple woolly booger and you can go catch fish all day. But if you really want to become a fly designer, a naturalist, there is just so much to learn. And so you can go to these clubs and you run into the old guys who've been doing this for a long time, and you will, like I did with Dr. Ed, increase my learning just exponentially as opposed to me going out and doing a trial and error.
Right.
So
Yeah.
that
That's a great place where the internet has come in to be a great place where we have these places we can meet and people from all over the world can showcase flies and talk about their ecosystem and what kind of flies they're tying and what you might try based off your ecosystem and how you could change things.
mhm.
So that's been a really great part of it. Now, if we really want to talk about what I need to know about, that's casting because I get made fun of. I cannot double haul.
Oh, you want a double haul lesson
I,
online?
I'm gonna have to do something, but what's it like to show people how to cast? Because there's a lot of pride. People have a lot of pride when it comes to casting.
Correct. So, first of all, my background, I was taught by my dad to fly cast. My dad was an aerospace engineer at NASA and was on the team that put a man on the moon.
Wow.
So, I didn't learn just fly casting, I learned the physics of fly casting. And that has really helped me understand fly casting. It's just not you move your arm this way. And this is the way I teach. You move your arm this way because. And the challenge in casting is everybody physically is built differently. I
Hmm.
mean, there's similarities, but everybody is a little bit broader shoulders, longer arms, stronger muscles. We get everything from 8 and 10 year olds to 80-year-olds who are starting off fly casting. So you have to be very aware of. Well, one thing is you have to be aware of physiology. So one of the things we did in our club is we had a physical therapist come to our club meeting and show you here are the muscles you should be using. Here's how to strengthen those muscles. And more importantly, here's how you don't hurt those muscles. Because one of the challenges, especially with the elderly people we're teaching, they can hurt themselves. If they're not in shape, they can tear a rotator cuff, as an example. So, but I have a routine like most certified casting instructors. Well, we get instructions from FFI, so we have a framework to teach from, but then we all have our different nuances in how we teach. So I very much teach the physics of fly casting, but translate that into very easy to understand concepts. So the biggest concept is, I'll take a step back. The hardest people to teach, conventional fishermen.
Yeah.
Because they pick up a rod and go, hey, I know how to cast this. And they do the same stroke as they do with a conventional rod. Here's what every one of them do. They break their wrist 90 degrees, which means they're catching grasshoppers behind them.
Yep.
And then when they go forward, they extend their arm out all the way, which means they're splashing the water in front of them.
Yeah.
So the casting stroke is very different. And the main concept is you've heard this before, you want the rod to do the work.
Mm-hmm.
So what the heck does that mean? We'll get into a little bit of the physics here. So as you start your casting stroke, you're pulling against the line. So for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. So as you gradually accelerate, you're pulling against the line harder and harder, which then bends the rod. Okay. Now that bend is called loading the rod. Mm-hmm. What you're doing is you're loading it with stored or potential energy. And if you want to know how much energy that is, hold the fly rod away from your face, bend it, and let it hit you in the face. You'll see how much stored energy there is. There's a lot.
It's quite a bit.
It's amazing how much. These fly rods we have nowadays are just amazing pieces of engineering. They really are. So you're putting that stored energy in. And then when you stop, and that's one of the biggest keys in fly casting, is you have to stop hard. When you stop hard, then all that stored energy is released all at once. One of the things I do to make this point with my students is I have them stand with the rod in front of them with two hands at a 45-degree angle. Then I pull out about 25 feet of line, walk behind them, and bend that rod, pull on that rod, just like you would if you were casting. Then I release it, and without them moving, they just make a perfect 25-foot cast.
Yeah. Just
by me pulling on the line. So the whole goal is to gradually accelerate, not like conventional, which is real fast up front, and then you slow down. Exact opposite. It's a gradual acceleration so that you start with the rod straight. Let's see if I can do this online. Start with the rod straight, but as you go forward, you bend the rod more and more and more, and then you stop, doing, and that shoots the line out.
Yeah, you get that movement to take it forward.
Mm-hmm. And then we talk all about tracking. So one of the concepts is if you want to cast a good distance, your line has to be straight.
Yeah.
It's like an arrow. Have you ever tried to shoot with a crooked arrow and hit the target?
Unfortunately, yes.
It's really, really hard, almost impossible. Well, it's the same thing with fly fishing. If you're not going straight, if you're curving your hand, whichever way, that means your fly line is following that rod tip and your fly line is now crooked or it has slack in it. You don't have a straight arrow.
Right.
So you're not going to be able to cast as far and you're not going to be as accurate. So we focus on tracking also quite a bit.
Yeah.
And those are the majority of the concepts. One is don't break your wrist on your back cast. Don't do it. And then don't extend your arm. Don't do that. Stop here at 90 degrees.
You're talking about the amount of energy and, slapping yourself in the face with the fly rod. I prefer to see how loud my buddy yells when I hook his ear. That's my gauge. You want to go fishing?
But it's amazing though when you got that 9-foot rod and you get somebody who really can cast fast. I've heard people get a radar gun out in your fly line. Your fly is going like 150 miles an hour.
That doesn't surprise me at all. That really, honestly, it's amazing. And for folks that don't fly fish a lot or haven't been around it, or maybe they're using a shorter rod for smaller streams, the big heavy, 8 weights and 9 weights that are 9 foot, that's you're moving a lot of line right then.
Oh, correction. 9 is my regular rod. A big rod is a 11 or 12.
Right. But for me, it's 5, 6 weights a normal rod.
Here's my big rod. I have an 11-foot two-handed switch rod, 12 weight. That's what I use for fishing on the jetties for tarpon because I have to cast into it. a 2-aught, 3-aught fly into a 15-mile-an-hour wind and cast it 60, 70 feet off the jetties.
See, that's beyond me. I'm not. No. Mm-mm. No. I like the
It's
wind to my back. Yeah.
it's challenging, but again, you challenge yourself, you grow, you learn more
Oh,
stuff.
yeah, and definitely, and you have those, tarpon are a great fish to catch. And everybody I know that's caught them absolutely loves them. And that's just the way it is. Those are the environments you have to be in to catch those fish. It's sort of, some environments you've got to really be able to know how to manage your line and everything, and you may have to do more roll casting because of trees, and then wind comes up when you're fishing on, on the salt water or even on a lake. There's a lot of wind that comes through, and that really changes the dynamic of how you do things. And so trying to understand those and putting yourself into different situations and breaking out of your comfort zone helps to build those techniques.
Correct. I couldn't agree with you more. Like this last weekend, I was at a real recovery retreat up in the Texas Hill Country, fishing some of the Hill Country streams. And there's a big limestone outcropping down the central part of Texas. And we have these beautiful crystal clear streams. These are some of the best kept secrets in Texas are the Hill Country streams. But they're lined with bald cypress trees that completely cover the river. And so every cast, you have to know where you are, what's behind you, what's beside you, what's above you, what's 100, 360 degrees, what's going on around you. And you learn, you just can't do a West Coast style like this. You got to be able to do this and this and this and every kind of cast you can
Yeah.
imagine.
I
But that's
watched
how you build those skills.
I watched a guy last summer. It was a pretty populated area of a river, and there's a couple of really good holes with some really nice trout in it. But he was sort of doing like a spay cast where he'd sort of bring the line in and make a figure eight and then bring it up and cast it over. So he didn't have any back cast behind him. And I was enamored by it. I'm like, now that's an interesting way to do it on this in a crowded area and a confined area. And I started doing it after. I'm like, I can try that, and got pretty
Well,
good at it. But it was an interesting way to know your situation, know where you were.
well, yeah, if you're shoulder to shoulder fishing, that's the best way to clear out an area for you to fish. Let's do one of these.
Yeah.
Big double spay and everybody clears out.
Yeah.
Or you catch your buddy in the ear, one of the two.
This was there was more floaters coming down. The river was split in half, and the good holes over here and the floaters come down and it joins up, and he was trying not to hook them. But it was an interesting day in and of
But
itself.
that is one of the concepts you just kind of pointed out in fly casting.
Mhm.
You need to pull against all of the line all the time. Now, most people think that means you can go in a straight, you need to go in a straight line. But you can do a big circle, but as long as you're moving all the line, then you can still load your rod. You can still bend that rod.
Yeah.
It's when you back cast and you come forward too soon. So some of the line is going back and now you got some going forward. Well,
Right.
you're not pulling against all the line all the time. Or if you have slacking line, you break your wrists. Now you got this big dip in the fly
Hmm.
line behind you. It takes half your casting stroke to get that slack, that dip out. So you're not loading the rod. You won't be able to cast near as far.
Yeah. And I think a lot of guys are like me. They're I had a college professor that sort of showed me how to cast. And then it was sort of like figure it out on your own. And there's a lot of trial and error. And I think that everybody could probably do with a casting lesson or two. It's like if you're a golfer and you just like playing scratch golf, you can always learn something by talking with somebody. And I think that's one thing that fly fishermen need to do a little bit more is not, oh, I taught myself it's okay. You need to learn a few things, especially if you're going to go into different environments.
I would agree, but like anything else, you're going to get out of it what you put into it.
Yeah.
Right? So, yes, if you want to jumpstart yourself, just like anything else, get an expert, someone who's been doing it, who knows how to teach it, get them to help you out. And then, yes, that will jumpstart you. But fly casting, like any other sport, requires a lot of practice.
Hmm.
So, here's something I learned. I read a lot of books on the brain whenever I can find one that's not too technical. And in several books, I found out that it takes you 3 weeks of practicing something to make a habit.
Hmm.
So people call it muscle memory. It's
Yeah.
really you're building the synapses connections in your brain. So you do it enough, you don't have to think about it.
Right.
So it's very difficult to pick up a fly rod and just do it. I've seen a handful of people that are naturals,
Hmm.
and they're usually fairly young, teenagers. They're naturals. But you got to practice. It was like me with golf. My buddies banned me from the golf course. I was so dangerous because I was playing softball. I had a softball swing. You know what happens when you drop that back shoulder?
Oh yeah.
The ball goes 100 yards straight ahead and 150 yards to the right. Yeah, and I just didn't practice enough. I had never take a lesson from a pro. So
Yeah.
yeah, so you get out of what you put in, and yeah, you can. And if you're a member of the club, one of the fly fishing clubs, like in Texas Fly Fishers, we give free sessions for people. We'll get dozen, 15 people together, and I think we've got 3 or 4 CIs now in the club, and we get together and we give free lessons. It really helps people out a lot.
Yeah, and that's really important. I know, and I've done it a couple of times. But there's no real, in this area we don't have a professional fly caster. Um, So the local conservation agency will sometimes do it, and then sometimes you'll get like the Sportsman's Club on the days that they put the stocker trout into the ponds. It's like, okay, we're showing you how to get the line out there. We're not, you're not going to be perfect when you come out of this, so don't get
Yeah,
frustrated. But a lot of it is simple roll casting and just simple techniques to get the line out there, because you can do a lot of things in a small pond with a roll cast that you know
sure.
you can't do with the trees and everything around you, and sort of just getting it out there. And so, don't, if you're getting into fly fishing, or a lot of guys got fly rods for Christmas and or tying kits, and they're starting to do a lot of stuff this time of year. They're starting to get out. Warm up with a roll cast or something, and sort of work your way up. There's no shame in it, just because my friend can double haul his 10 weight to the backing doesn't mean I should be ashamed when I can't.
Oh yeah, you should be.
Well, thank you for that vote of confidence.
Oh, but length matters.
Yeah.
Distance matters, and here's why. Here's why. This is something that a lot of people don't know, and I learned this in Gary Borger's book Presentations. So the refraction angle of light into the water is at about 10 degrees. So if you look, the bottom of the screen is the surface of the water. 10 degrees is about right there. If you're standing, so your head is above that 10 degrees, the fish can see you.
That's why I wear a ghillie suit.
What?
I wear one of those big ghillie suits and I look like a bush.
That might actually work. I've never tried that.
You can't tell if I'm deer hunting or fly fishing.
So if you're only 4 feet tall, then you don't have to cast very far, and the fish can't see you. But if you're 6 feet tall, you got to be able to cast further to stay underneath that 10-degree angle.
Yeah.
So distance does matter, especially like when we're out saltwater fishing down in the Caribbean. The water is gin clear.
Yeah.
And if we're above that 10 degrees, the fish see us.
Oh yeah.
And especially sight fish like snook and permit, if they see you, never mind.
Yeah.
Chance of you catching them are slim to none.
Yeah. And that's one thing that I say a lot to my friends. I'm like, if you can see the fish, it can see you. You walk up and you see a pool, just go back, go further back and drift into it. Don't try and sit here where you can cast, because they're going to see you. Kneel down. I kayak fish majority of the time, and I've practiced sitting on a 5-gallon bucket casting so that when I get in my kayak, I can sit down and cast. And that's a nice thing to do because I'm in that environment, as opposed to, I don't stand up and cast nearly as much as I do sit down and cast.
That's a great tip for people. So practice casting the way you're going to be casting.
Yeah.
And if you're sitting in your kayak and you can make a 50-foot cast, you're going to catch a lot more fish. Like if you're on a lake, not necessarily stream, but if you're on a lake, you'll catch a lot more fish because you're going to be way below that 10-degree refraction angle.
Yeah. And that's what a lot of people, I see this a lot with, even my friends that know how to fish, they'll still get a little too close. And, the success rate goes up exponentially the further back. And now I'm not saying hide behind a bush and, I've heard guys say that, hide behind a bush and cast around. And
oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
Well, yeah, it probably works, but there are some tips and tricks.
Well, here's the kicker too. You've got a 9-foot pole, and I held it right here at about 5 feet. That means I'm 14 feet up.
Yeah.
because some fish like permit, they will see the rod tip and they're gone. So you got to learn to do side casting
Yeah.
to get that rod tip down. So that's even a consideration. If you were sitting in the kayak, you cast right overhand, some fish will pick up that rod tip.
Yeah. That's definitely the case, especially when they're shiny and they glint off in the lights in the summertime. I mean, there's all kinds of things that can happen with that. So, but yeah, I mean, it's really interesting. So you fished all of these different places and you really like targeting the tarpon down there. What are some of the most interesting places that you've been, and some of the fish that maybe folks like me who aren't planning on going to Belize anytime soon might be able to?
Well, actually, we've got a trip coming up in September to Chetumal, which is south of Cancun, and it's on Chetumal Bay. So on the Yucatan, you have Ascension, Espiritu Santo, and then Chetumal Bay. And so we're going to Chetumal Bay, and it'll be super slam, tarpon, permit, bonefish, and snook. So opportunities. But if you don't want to go all the way down there, because it is a bit of a hassle to get down there. I was in the Everglades almost 4 weeks ago and caught 7 snook, jumped 7 tarpon up to 80 pounds, and caught a personal best 30-inch red drum, redfish.
Wow.
So there are places close, and there's a lot of places in Florida. You don't have to go all the way down to the Keys.
Yeah.
Yeah, there are places, and there's even places off the Texas coast where you can catch tarpon.
Yeah. Now, I don't think I know there weren't, I'm assuming there weren't any tarpon in the area, but for redfish down in Grand Isle and over in Port Sulphur in Louisiana, that was a neat place. But it's a whole new world when you start talking about alligators being in the water with you.
Actually, you don't have to worry too much about alligators. They are nocturnal feeders. Because I've been out in some of the wildlife refuges, and I'm in there in my kayak, and here comes about a 12-foot alligator. They'll rise to the surface, and they'll scope you out. And as long as your kayak's longer than the alligator, then they just settle back down, and you never see them again.
Yeah, it's when you go by and you see the big alligator slide, and you just get a little unsettled.
Well, the Everglades, that's the only place in the world we have alligators and saltwater crocodiles in the
Yeah.
same ecosystem.
Yeah,
Yeah, we saw one big croc down there.
Yeah, that is, man, that's got to be unnerving to a certain extent.
I'll tell you a goofy story. We were down in Belize. We were at El Pescador, which is a world-class lodge, just great. And we came in fishing, and I was talking to the bartender. He said, "Hey, you want to go catch some tarpon? I know where some tarpon are, some small tarpon in these back lakes." So he gets me, and I'm 6'1". I'm a big guy, and another big guy, and him. We all three got in a canoe. And so he's paddling us in the canoe, and we're going through the mangroves. We're ducking down, and, swatting mosquitoes off. And then we finally get to the big lake where he's taking us. And the first thing we see is about a 10-foot crocodile. And they look at you for a little bit, and they go, and you never see them again. And so here we are. And tarpon swallow air. They can't really breathe, but they swallow air, and when they do, some bubbles pop up. So you're actually casting to the bubbles. And so he said, "Oh, just take 40-pound tippet. We'll catch some 5 or 10-pound tarpon." First cast I made to a bubble, set the hook, a 40-pound tarpon jumped. Can you imagine 3 big guys in a canoe trying to land a 40-pound tarpon? Fortunately, a 40-pound tarpon with a 40-pound tippet.
Yeah.
It was one jump. He shook his head and he shredded my leader. It was like, whew.
Yeah. That's one of my biggest fears is that I'm going to hook into a bull red on the kayak, and you're not going to see me again because it's just going to decide to go, and there's nothing I can do about it.
Well, they only go about 30, 40 miles offshore, so you can probably paddle back. You can make it.
Hopefully the tide will be coming in.
You can make it, Sean. I'm confident you can make it back.
I don't know. It'll depend on how big the cooler is when I got out there. But I mean, that's, and I know that these guys do that. They go and they chase these bull reds in these kayaks. And I'm like, man, I would just be scared to death that you would just see me going off into the sunset,
Yeah. How about the guys, I've seen videos. These people are nuts. Billfish fishing in kayaks.
There's no way. I can't imagine that. That's
There's no crocodiles offshore.
right. Well, yeah, that's true, but there's
There's just
sharks.
really big sharks.
I'm always amazed by the guys who are fly fishing and the sharks take half the fish when they get it close to them. This is
Oh
not
yeah.
good.
Speaking of Louisiana, one trip we take every year is go out to the Chandelier Islands.
Mm-hmm.
There's some islands about 30 miles off the coast of Louisiana, and the leeward side is just full of trout and redfish and sharks.
Yeah.
And so one of the tricks is you catch a fish, you put it in your basket, and you keep moving. If you stay in one place too long, my buddy caught this big speckled trout. It must have been 28 to 30 inches, but he stayed in one place, and a shark came up and bit it in half.
Yeah.
The top half was 5 pounds. Well, I had caught a 25-inch trout, and I was moving around, so I had the biggest trout that got back to the boat.
Yeah. That's and people don't realize that, it doesn't even have to be, especially with bull sharks, but even in that brackish water in the bayou, black tips are in there. We were
Black tips, shovel nose, sand sharks. There's several different species.
Yeah. And the black tip's the one you more need to worry about if you're in a kayak, but or falling out of a kayak.
The bull sharks are the ones you got to worry about.
The bull shark. But I mean, as far as the others,
Okay.
But the bull sharks and the black tips are the ones you want to stay in the boat.
Okay, so I'm going to tell you a story so you'll never come fishing in the Texas surf.
I don't know if I want to hear this or not.
There's a guy, his name Billy Sandiford. And so on the Texas coast, we have Padre Island National Seashore, which is the longest undeveloped beach in North America. It's 60 miles of undeveloped beach. Very thick sand. You got to have four-wheel drive. Well, Billy guided on that. He had a great big old four-wheel drive Suburban. And we went out fishing with him, myself and Phil Shook, who's a sports writer, a couple other people. And we're going out, and all of a sudden Phil says, stop. And we get out, grab our rods. We're going out casting. There's a school of black tips that are almost on the beach, 4 to 6 foot long black tips.
Nice.
And they were swimming right. And I've got 12-pound test. I'm casting to a 6 foot. I'm going, why the hell am I doing this? This is crazy. So we get down and we get out. Billy says, okay, here's the rules. You never land a fish in the water. If somebody catches a fish, everybody comes on shore. You'll hear me honk the horn. Everybody comes on shore. You only land a fish on shore.
Mm-hmm.
He said, yeah, whatever, Billy, whatever. This is great. Then he tells us, okay, you can go to the first sandbar and you'll be okay. But if you go to the second sandbar, there's 4 sandbars. You go to the second sandbar, you become an integral part of the food chain.
Yeah.
Okay, so we fished all day. We went to the first sandbar, fished all day, caught a ton of fish, had a great time. On the way back, Billy pulls out this picture of him and one of his other customers. This guy was like 6 foot tall and 300 pounds. Hanging between them was a 12-foot, 900-pound tiger shark that this guy hooked between the third and fourth sandbar.
Yeah.
They caught it, they killed it, they stuck it in the back of his Suburban. The tail was dragging out. They drove it up to Corpus and hung it up and weighed it.
Oh, Lord. That thing had to be monstrous.
Oh, yeah, that's monstrous.
That's monster. Well, what got me, I went to Navarre Beach down in Florida, and they've got this really great pier. And these guys are always trying to catch tarpon off this pier. And then I guess they break them off because I know you can't reel them up 40 feet. And I don't know what the rules are with tarpon in Florida about keeping them wet and everything else. But like the week before we left, this woman had caught, I think it was, it may have been, I guess it was a bull shark that she caught off the pier. And then we went down there and we took the kayaks out, and we were out past the pier, but not a lot. And then like 3 weeks later, after we get back, we're seeing just different photos of the time since we left. And the June grass had sort of thinned out because it was real bad and we were down there. And there's sharks, just, a drone shot of just sharks. And we're like, we were fishing like right there,
Oh, yeah.
And you just don't know if,
Yeah, because the sharks won't bother you unless you do something really stupid. But
right.
Yeah, I've had several people, because we have a lot of oil wells off the Texas coast. So I've known people who've flown helicopters out to the rigs, and they say, if you ever fly over the Texas coast, you'll never get in the water again.
Yeah.
But I've surfed all since I was this tall, and I've never had any problem with sharks.
Yeah. But people think nothing about cows and vending machines, and they kill more people a year than sharks do.
Yeah, so it's fun. But
Yeah.
I got to tell you, the Texas coast is pretty amazing. So I'm going to do a little plug for the Texas coast. We have some of the longest barrier islands in the
Hmm.
world, which means we have very, very large bay systems. And we have the rivers that flow into the bay systems, and they become very brackish water. So sometimes they'll have high salinity, sometimes they'll almost be fresh. But that environment builds these incredible estuaries, just incredible. I was doing a casting seminar in Austin for the Fly Fishing Club, who had several Texas Parks and Wildlife biologists there.
Hmm.
And so I got to be buds with some of them, and they told me a story. They will do a survey of animal life. They will take a 1 square meter box and put it into the marsh and then count everything that's alive in there. And in that 1 square meter, they would find sometimes over 300 living organisms, shrimp and crabs and fish and snails, and just they would take the results to these conferences in other parts of the world, and the other biologists, would accuse them of lying because there was just so much life in these estuaries. They really are amazing. So we have some really good fishing in Texas because of that.
And also, you guys have rather, I mean, you have more generous limits than some places, but not nearly as generous as others when it
Yeah,
comes to.
Texas Parks and Wildlife does a very good job of protecting the fisheries. So the feds are very strict, like offshore on the snapper.
Hmm.
But yeah, in Texas, like year before last, we had a really bad freeze, and not so much the redfish, but the trout and a lot of bait fish are very temperature sensitive, and we had a huge fish kill, really really bad fish kill. So as soon as they did that, the limits went way down. So only like I think it was 2 speckled trout
Yeah.
per person per day
Yeah.
were
And
the
you're
limits.
looking at Louisiana, it's 25.
Yeah, and
You
we have a
know,
limit of 15 inches in Louisiana. I think it's
yeah.
12.
Yeah. Yeah. And I don't know how long this is going to be sustainable for Louisiana. I really don't, because that's a lot of fish to pull out. And a lot of the guys down there are specifically targeting specks because you can catch a bunch of them. The redfish are I think it's five, maybe
Yeah,
five,
it's 5.
five.
It's
Yeah.
3 in Texas. Yeah,
Yeah.
5.
And so, it's fun if you're going to go down there once a year and you're going to eat fish all, for 4 days. You can catch a couple of reds here and there, you can catch a couple of specks there and there, and 5 or 6 guys can have a good time. But I don't see how that's sustainable over the long run.
Oh, I agree. Yeah, catch and release, of course, is
Yeah.
something we practice a lot. Occasionally, I'll bring home a redfish, and if I catch a flounder, I have to bring it home because that's my wife's favorite.
Those are tasty, though. Those are
They're
tasty.
wonderful. Yeah.
Oh, man. And
So
sheep's head are good.
during certain times of the year, in the
Yeah.
wintertime, yes.
Yeah. The
Summertime,
winter.
they get worms.
Right. Right. But in the winter, they're really
Very,
good.
very light, flaky meat. Yes.
Yeah. And we were talking to some people that go down to where in Louisiana we'd been going lately. And I guess in the winter they get back up there. There's a big bay just off Grand Isle. And I guess they stack up in there because they've got all the rocks built up for eddies to protect it. And I guess those just stack up in there.
In the early spring, the sheephead get out on the flats. I think
Hmm.
they're spawning, but I don't know for sure. So you're right. During the summertime, they're always around piers and rocks, and they're really hard to catch. But they will get out on the flats.
Yeah.
So every February, we have a fishing tournament called the what do the guys call it? They call it the permit prison fishing tournament. Prison permit fishing, and it's sheephead.
Yeah.
It's another excuse to go out and get on the boat and drink some beer and try
Right.
and catch sheephead because they're really hard to catch. They have
Yeah.
small mouths, a lot of teeth, and they're very spooky when they get on the flats.
Yeah.
But
And
that's
their
the
teeth
best time.
their teeth are it looks like people teeth.
Oh yeah, they're
I
for
mean,
crunching.
yeah, and that freaked me out whenever I caught mine. I was like, "Ooh," because you see pictures and you're like, "Okay, that's one thing," but then to have it
No,
there, that's a whole nother deal.
that's one fish you don't put your finger in their mouth. Nope.
No, no, no. No, 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 no.
Yeah, but that's another species we do target in the early
Yeah,
spring.
yeah, and that's
They're
what
a lot of fun. They fight really hard too.
oh, yeah, they do. I caught mine in late October, and,
Oh, that's unusual.
I thought I was pulling up a tire. It just like it just sat at the bottom. It was wild, and I mean, it was, and when it fought. But I mean, it was really tough. But they're really neat fish, and there are just so many neat fish out there that you can tell what you've got by the way they fight, because
Yeah.
they're so
Mhm.
unique in how they do that.
Yeah. So a sheephead, think about catching a 7-pound sunfish.
Yeah,
That's what it's like.
yeah,
That's what
they're
it's like.
they're
Yeah.
wild.
So we've got red drum, speckled trout, flounder, sheephead, ladyfish, mutton snapper as you go further south. Those are always good. That's a good eat. And just, we have lots of fun on the Texas coast.
I've always heard ladyfish are fun to catch.
They are like mini tarpon.
Yeah,
As soon as you hook them, they jump like crazy.
yeah,
But they also have that sharp pads, just like tarpon do. And when they shake their head, they will shred your leader. So you have to put on a fluorocarbon leader, and they're pretty good at tearing up flies too. But they
yeah.
are a hoot to catch.
Yeah, I've got a friend of mine that catches them once in a while, and he says basically stick your fly rod underneath your arm and strip like crazy.
They like to chase shiny things.
Yeah. So when you're talking about your flies, how I know, that all the flies are a little bit different, but I would think that like a sheep's head and a redfish would both be crabs or crustaceans. Pretty
Right.
easy, you know. A lot of the guys that I've seen that are catching specks are using a lot of silver, a lot of bright, flashy stuff. What's one of your go-to flies for specks in your area?
Well, it depends upon the time of the year and what's out there.
I knew you were going to say that.
So one of the resident bait fish is pinfish.
Mhm.
So I have a deer hair pinfish pattern that works really well. But the one species that specks feed on the most are finger mullet. So striped
Okay.
mullet or silver mullet. So that's the pattern that Umpqua carries. It's called a rattle mullet.
Okay.
Not that I'm biased, but I think it's the best mullet imitation on the market. And I've caught the biggest trout I ever caught was on the rattle mullet. And I've had people tell me they've caught 26, 28-inch trout on that fly.
Nice.
So, and then depending on what time of the year, like in the early spring, the brown trout migrate from offshore where they've spawned back inshore. So if you
Okay.
get a big incoming tide, you want to throw something that's going to mimic a brown shrimp.
Right.
But then the white shrimp in the fall, they've been in the estuaries, they start migrating offshore. So on the Texas coast, we fish the birds. You'll hear people say, "Oh, we're going to
Hmm.
go fish the birds." As the shrimp school up and start heading offshore, the predator fish will chase them and chase them to the surface. The seagulls will see it and they'll start diving on the shrimp. So you can have your binoculars look across the bay and go, "There's a school of trout,"
Right.
and head over and cast into the birds.
Now,
So
when it
use
comes, oh, sorry, when it
so,
comes
so
to,
the white shrimp. Have you ever seen a Borsky slider?
yeah,
We tie a light colored like a Borsky slider, but a lot of times we don't put weight on it because when the shrimp get chased to the surface,
hmm,
we don't want something that's going to sink fast. So that's a good pattern.
I've had a little bit of luck of an evening doing a popping shrimp across the top of the water in Louisiana, and that's just for, and trust me, we're just catching like those little sand trout or whatever. But
Mhm.
it's just fun to catch anything on a smaller fly rod like that. But those little popping shrimp seem to do really well when we're down there in October. Um,
Yes. So when you're learning your ecosystem and learning your predator species, one of the first things I look for is what is the shape of the mouth.
yeah,
So a tarpon, their mouth, I mean, it opens like this, almost straight up.
yeah,
So they're feeding from below and looking up. So when you're tying flies, they're looking at a profile. So you want to make sure your profile looks just like a bait fish. A red drum, their mouth points down.
yeah.
So you know they're feeding a lot on the bottom. And then speckled trout, they're kind of in between. Their mouth still opens up, but not so much as a tarpon. But that does mean that they're feeding in the middle and the upper part of the water column a
Hmm.
lot. So that popping noise that mimics a shrimp jumping out of the water.
Yeah.
The shrimp jumps, and I've seen brown shrimp that are this long. I've seen them jump 6 to 8 feet out of the water
Really?
when a trout's chasing them. Yeah,
Yeah.
they got that big, powerful tail. Then They go flying.
Huh.
And so that sound, that popping when they go out of the water, that attracts the specks. So a lot of times, if you have something that pops, yeah, you're going to catch them. The pinfish pattern that I tie, it's a deer hair pattern that sits right in the surface film,
Hmm.
and when I pull it, it pops a little bit, and that noise, the redfish and the trout pick it up and come and nail it.
Hmm. Now, I know when we were at Sawbug, you were showing me a couple of little techniques with deer hair. A lot of your flies are deer hair, correct?
That's my specialty, is tying bait fish patterns for warm water and salt water with deer hair.
Yeah.
And I really like deer hair because depending upon how you weight the fly, how much hair you put on, you can have something that sits way high on the surface of the film, something that's just right underneath the surface film, or something that's neutral buoyant. So if you combine that with the deer hair with, are you using a floating line, an intermediate sink, or a full sink,
Mhm.
you can come up with, hitting the entire water column. A neutral buoyant fly with a full sink, a floating fly with a full sink, and you get different actions, mimic different things depending upon those combinations of fly line and where the fly is floating.
Yeah, and that's a really, really, really good tip because I know certain times a year I want to use a sinking line with a certain fly, and then I can use my tippet, or I use a sinking leader a lot of times, but then I can adjust my tippet for where I want it to be in the water column, and that those little things distinguish somebody who's going to catch a fish and somebody who's going to have a really good day fishing.
Correct. There's all sorts of tricks. Like when it gets cold on the Texas coast, the fish have a tendency to get into the deeper holes,
Hmm.
and they're pretty lethargic, because the trout. So we put on an intermediate or full sinking line with a floating fly. And you cast out, you let it sink, so the fly's not on the bottom, but as you pull it, it kind of sinks and floats up.
Yep.
And so it becomes a very easy meal for those lethargic fish, and
Yeah.
it's pretty effective.
Yeah, and around here in the summertime when we're looking at smallmouth bass, they'll get down in a deeper hole under a rock, and you've got to get that fly on the bottom and get it to come out from that hole that they're in, and they'll
Mhm.
jump out and get it. But you can cast all day long with a bait fish, and you're never going to get one out of there. You throw a big heavy crawdad in there and get it down, and bam, they're on. And again, that's all part of becoming a naturalist.
Yes, agreed. Hmm. So
So
it's the naturalist, but also figuring out problems.
yeah,
So it's cold, lethargic. Where are the fish? They're down low. I don't want to they're in the grass, so I can't have something heavy that's going to
mhm,
get caught up in the grass. I want something that's going to float above the grass, but it's got to stay low. So yeah, full sinking line or an intermediate sinking line with a floating fly, and you solve that problem.
yeah, yeah. Now, do you have? I haven't been able to. I didn't. I guess I didn't really go and start looking though. But do you have an Instagram or anything that people can look at some of your flies on?
Unfortunately, I work for one of the high tech companies. I'm an information management specialist,
Oh yeah.
and a security. I know too much.
Okay.
I
Gotcha.
do very little social media. Yeah. If you ever watch The Social Dilemma,
Yes.
okay, I know what all that means, and I even sell some of that stuff.
Yeah, and not to go off in the weeds, but that was an eye-opening experience. I mean, you sort of know it in the back of your mind, but the way it was presented there, it was a real shocker. And I have a 17-year-old daughter, and she's just mad in a wet hen because she doesn't have any social media. And I'm like, You turn 18, you can make your own mind up, but until then,
Oh
you
yeah,
know."
we did the same thing, because the rule of thumb is, if it's a free service, you are the product,
Yeah,
which means somebody is capturing and selling your data.
yeah,
So, but as soon as I retire, which will hopefully be soon, then I'll be more open to that kind
yeah.
of thing.
Yeah,
So,
definitely. And I mean, it's nice to see what other people are tying. That can really be helpful. Just as you look at the situation, you look at where you're at and where other people are at, and sort of some of the similarities and differences. That's always been something I've really enjoyed. And books. I mean, it seems like you see guys with stacks and stacks of books, and it's like, well, why are you buying a book? You can just jump online and watch the video. And I think that books and articles are really still valuable, extremely valuable. Otherwise, they still wouldn't be printing them.
oh yeah, I agree wholeheartedly. And also, I'm going to do a plug for FFI,
Mhm.
the Education Center. Yeah, you can go out on YouTube, but you don't know if that person really knows what they're doing. I've seen some fly tying demos. I'm going, yeah, you can cast that thing about 3 times and it's going to fall apart.
Yeah. Oh, you've been watching my channel?
So if you go to the Fly Fishers International website and go to fly tying, you'll see that there's a lot of educational information, but most importantly, there's a very, very large video library, and every one of those is curated by experts.
Mhm.
So
And
if you go to the
FFI,
FFI,
it's not really expensive to join.
well, the education sites are free.
Oh, are they? Oh, they're free too. Okay.
Yeah, both the fly tying and the fly casting, those are free. Anybody in the world can get to those.
Well, that's
But
cool.
there are member benefits, and also the FFI. It's all about education and conservation.
Right.
So think about your membership as a donation.
Right.
That's the way I
Yeah.
think about it.
Yeah. And that's one of the big things. And we get a lot of people in Missouri, because we don't have, natural trout, native trout. We don't have reproducing trout, except in one or two very small rivers. But your trout stamp is like $7. And they used to have a trout stamp to go to these parks, and then they repealed that. And it's like, I may not catch or keep, I'm not going to keep a trout unless it's, something that is actually going to be edible, which in Missouri is rare. A really nice big trout, but a lot of people don't realize just buying that stamp is it's a donation to the state for them to take care of the fisheries.
Yeah, because a lot of people don't realize that it's us that enjoy the environments. We're the ones who are making sure that they're sustainable. And it's the agencies like Texas Parks and Wildlife and Missouri. It's those agencies as well as nonprofits. Like I've been a member of Nature Conservancy for many, many, many years. I
Mhm.
think they do a lot of good work too, of going in and buying and preserving a natural habitat. They'll
Yeah.
go in and buy a 20,000 acre ranch and then keep it. And through our donations, our memberships, we're helping support that to keep those ecosystems intact.
Yeah, and a lot of people get upset when an agent wants to check their license, and I'm all for it. And I've gotten to know several agents by name, and they're the best ones to get tips for what's hot where. You know.
That and find the state agency biologists,
Yes, yes.
the
I
people
got
who
the
do the fish surveys.
Yep.
They're the ones that get to know.
I was fishing by one of those guys 2 years ago, and I got some really good tips. Yeah. Those those guys are underrated resources.
Yes, I would agree with that. The other, on the fly tying side, get to know a taxidermist.
Yes.
That is what a taxidermist. I've got a taxidermist up in East Texas near where my mom lives, and I don't tell anybody about them because they're world renowned and they get mounts from all over the world. And they let me go through their scrap box, and
Oh,
I have
yeah.
all sorts of furs and hair and amazing. I got. I don't know if I told you. Yeah, I did tell you about this one. So I found this hair that is. It glistens. It's beautiful, and it's just perfect for tying a brown shrimp pattern. You remember what I told you? What it was? Did I tell you that?
I don't remember what you said. Uh,
Kodiak brown bear
that's
armpit hair.
Yeah, that was it. Yeah, brown bear. Yeah.
Armpit has to be armpit
Armpit.
hair.
It has to be the
Yeah,
armpit.
because just like us, that hair in your armpit's real soft. When they
Yep.
mount the bear and they have extra, because they tan the hide out and they put it on a big styrofoam mount.
Mhm.
Well, if they've got too much hide, they take the extra out from the armpit. So I got these swatches of armpit hair, and it's very nice and supple and soft and glistens just perfect. Oh, it makes the best brown shrimp pattern.
Yeah. But you can't just go out and pick it up at the store.
Actually, I did find somebody who has some.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so I was able to get a couple. I was running out, and I found a couple more pieces. And people tell me, really, how do you go and harvest Kodiak brown bear armpit hair? You go out and wait till they're asleep, and go out there and go. Cheep, cheep, cheep.
No better way to do it, man. No
Yeah.
better way to do it. Dude, this has been an awesome show. I've enjoyed it.
Oh yeah. Oh, I can sit here and talk for days on this stuff if you want.
Well, we'll probably wind up bringing you back on. People tend to get bored after an hour of sitting here with me.
Have we gone for an hour already?
Yeah.
Wow. Time
Yeah.
flies. Time flies.
Amazing, isn't it?
If you want me to come on and drill down into an area, like as an example, I did a session for Texas Parks and Wildlife just on bass bugs, just
Yeah.
on focusing on bass, and that's something. Any kind of warm water all across the United States. It's great.
Yeah, and I think bass is I think that's an area that a lot of people, I know when I started fly fishing, the idea was trout.
Mm-hmm.
And I learned I took a course on, and I've said this a dozen times, I took a course on tying flies, and they were all, size 14 and smaller, and it just wasn't working for me. And so when I got back into tying flies, it was strictly because of bass. And so I think I fished, we got back into fishing, I think probably 8 or 9 years before I actually went after trout, because I was just enjoying the warm water so much, and it's so much more accessible. I mean, a ditch pickle will live anywhere if there's, a little bit of oxygen in the water, but
Yes.
they're really cool because they explode. I started tying up some master splinters the other day. And, one of my friends was like, "Well, are you going to go back down to Cotter and fish of an evening in the fall?" I'm like, "No, dude, this is going to be for summertime with those bass in the morning and the evening." I'm like, "This is what we're going to use." And I think, that idea of understanding what you have around you to fish for.
Oh yeah, couldn't agree with you more. And that around here we have all sorts of opportunities: sand pits, neighborhood ponds,
Mm-hmm.
canals, even. Yeah,
Yep.
it's. I've been fishing for bass since I was 3 years old,
Yeah.
and it's a lot of fun, especially topwater and fly rod. Oh, that's so much fun.
Oh yeah. If it just wasn't for those guys in those boats running around, you know, ma-
Yeah,
making wakes everywhere when we're
you're
trying to
sitting there in your
paddle.
kayak and a bass boat goes by 50 miles an hour. Yeah.
I'll tell you what, I've had to watch the rivers. I was at one river, and it's not a big river, but I wasn't thinking about the guys that had jet boat engines.
Yeah.
And you want to know scary is when you see a jet boat coming around a corner and you got to paddle that kayak out of the way and then stay on it with the up and down of the wake. That'll change your mind on where you're fishing real quick.
Yeah, I know. The kayaker too.
I know we us kayakers, there's something wrong with us, except we're not.
Oh no, it's about the peace and quiet. The
Hey,
peace and quiet.
it's about not having high gas prices.
And insurance and maintenance and
Bust out another 1,000. Isn't that what a boat stands for?
the saying down here is a boat is a hole in the water you pour your money into.
That's exactly right. Ron, this has been great. We'll get you back on and we'll focus just on some bass bugs now that the spring bites getting ready to start just about everywhere. I know crappie are wild right now, and as soon as the people get out of the crappie bug, they're going to be into the bass
Oh,
bugs. So we'll
oh,
get together and talk about some of
we got
that.
to get you down here to white bass fish sometime.
Yes, that is something I'd like to do, especially on a fly rod.
Yeah,
I think that would be really wild.
That's late February, early March white bass season. So,
Well, I guess
good.
next year we know where we're going to go.
Very good.
Yeah, and then we'll have
Appreciate you having
that.
me.
Then we'll have the sow bug after that. We can hit the FFI down there. We can just I can just quit my job and just travel with you for a year.
That's why I want to retire. That's exactly what I'm going to do.
Oh. All right, guys, we'll be back next week. Next week, we have Don from breambugs.com because we're going to be talking about bluegill. For those of you that like the ultralight and the really small fly rods, I know I'm going to be talking a lot about my 1 and 2 weight and different flies that you can focus for bluegill and panfish. So join us then.
Thanks, Sean.
Thank you.